Booz Allen Hamilton. She also has a background of 14 years in operations, which is like longer than I've even been doing programming. But also another aspect of her background, she actually is, she plays women's football, most recently for the New York Sharks as a defensive end. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. Her talk is GridIronOps, what women's tackle football can teach us about software delivery. I'm really excited for it. I'll give her a huge round of applause.
Thank you, James. So, like James said, today we're going to talk a little bit about football, a little bit about DevOps, and how both can cross over and what we can learn from each other. So, the first thing we want to talk about is me. So my name is Katie Rose. I'm a professional women's football player, most recently for the New York Sharks. I've been playing for about 4 years. I'm a defensive end. I've also played a few other positions, offensive tackle, tight end. I'm a 2014 All-American. I was the marketing director for the Sharks. Professionally, I also worked about 14 years on the operations side. I left that job, started my own startup, which did not succeed, and I went back into developing with Booz Allen. So now I'm a UI UX developer with Booz Allen. So that's all about me, and we can get started. So the reason we're having this conversation is the culture question. We all know that culture is important. The question isn't whether it's important, it's what we do about it. And so this is a really important quote that I found when I was researching for this, and it's from Gartner. Ian Head, the research director at Gartner, estimates that by 2018, 90% of organizations attempting to use DevOps without specifically addressing their cultural foundations will fail. That's 90%. So it's very huge. And we talk a lot about tools. We do talk about culture, but if you don't correctly address that culture, no matter what tools you're using, they will not be successful. So why football? So I know it's probably the biggest reason that it's on the program. People are like, how is this going to work? So the reason we're talking about football, and this is an important quote from Vince Lombardi, people who work together will win, whether it be against complex football defenses or the problems of modern society. We talk specifically in football, culture is huge. A lot of people call football the ultimate team sport, and that's because of the culture of football. So there's a few overlapping principles. You've got specialization, mission focus. Those are the two that we're going to focus on today. Then you've got teamwork, agility and flexibility, and continuous assessment. Also, another overlap between DevOps and football is that there are a lot of people that have roles that don't ever get the glory. You have your quarterbacks, you have your running backs, you have your receivers. There are a lot of other people on the football field who are doing their jobs with their heads down, grinding out day after day, so that the whole team can be successful. And DevOps is very much the same way. We don't all get the glory, but hopefully we all enjoy the outcome. And why women's football? And this is a really important point. So I don't know how many of you have heard of her. There's a woman named Jen Welter. She's the first female NFL coach. She was an interim coach over the summer or during the offseason for the Arizona Cardinals. She said this quote here, and just to summarize, it's essentially what Vince Lombardi said, but she's saying it as a woman. And why that's important is, as women playing football, right now, the culture is, we don't start playing until we're adults. So the cultural shift that's necessary, that football culture where there's a lot of overlap, we don't learn those things until we're adults. I started playing football when I was 30 years old. So all these things that little boys and young men learn that are critical to football are things that women, grown women with jobs and families, have to take in and do that cultural shift as adults. So that's why Jen Welter's quote is important. She's saying the same thing as Vince Lombardi, but she's saying that as somebody who learned those lessons as a grown-up. So how do we take those same lessons and those same principles and how women adopted them as adults and use those same techniques for helping adults who are in the workforce adopt them for DevOps? So I spoke with one of my previous coaches, Coach LB, LeBryant Robinson. I know that's not how it looks like it's spelled, but it is. I'll show you a little bit, maybe a picture in a minute, but this is what he told me. I spoke to him, I asked him some questions about what he thought, and he said for women, the culture of football is being learned at an older age, but still plays a major role in the success of women's football. So even the coaches know it. The coaches are addressing this problem because they are teaching women how to be football players as adults rather than children. This, real quick, is just a gratuitous picture of my defensive line. That's my man right there, Coach LB. He's a beast. He was actually in the NFL for a few years. He was drafted by the Skins, played for the Bills, played in the CFL, and now he's the defensive coordinator for the Sharks. So let's get into the meat of it. We've got specialization versus silos. This quote I like a lot because it's really true and I've seen it happen to a lot of people on the football field. You get hit the hardest when trying to run or hide from a problem. Like the defense on a football field, putting all focus on evading one defender is asking to be blindsided. And that's essentially what we're doing when we're in silos. I'm going to run down through a few things between silos and specialization. I know that most of you are probably pretty familiar with silos and where the breakdowns occur, but we're going to walk through them to get that contrast between the two. So with silos and specialization both, you have those refined skill sets, right? You have everybody being able to do what they do best. But with silos, you have that limited scope and orbit. You're only working within the confines of what you do best. You don't see everything else that's happening, and you don't have the input and the resources of other people who do other things that well. Whereas you have the big picture with specialization. With silos, you get that good enough. As long as it's good enough to throw it over the fence, right? I knew this guy when I was younger. His quote was, "Good enough for government work." As long as you can throw it over the fence, it was good enough. With specialization, there's no fence. So everything that you send out there is going to be coming back to you. There's this constant feedback loop. So that brings us to our next point. With specialization, you have increased communication channels and feedback loops. With silos, you don't. You have in and out. So with specialization, if a problem occurs, you watch it happen, you can address it. With silos, you send something over the fence, you don't find out until it's already down the channel that there's a problem, it's got to come back in, you have to learn what the problem is, regather information, and then solve that problem. If your eyes are open, and that's how we get to this head in a swivel in tunnel vision. I don't know how many of you are familiar with sports. Tunnel vision is that laser focus on the thing that's exactly in front of you. Head in a swivel doesn't change what your job is. It just means that you're surveying the field to make sure that you're taking in all the necessary information to do your job right. And then we have with silos, your teams are homogenous, everybody's doing the same thing. With specialization, you have those diverse team roles within the same team so that everybody can rely on each other. So we're going to go through a really, really quick example. I'm going to keep it as very simple football as possible for those in the room who aren't very familiar with football. But we are going to talk about a part of football that is not as familiar to most people, because he didn't bring me up here to tell you things you already know. So this is the offensive and defensive line. We're going to go through a quick situational play on the offensive and defensive line. This is the part of football where people just smash into each other over and over. That's my job. So this first person here, this is your quarterback. This is the person who's going to be getting the ball. This is the defensive line. That's me. We're the people that try to tackle that person when she has the ball. This is the offensive line. They're trying to keep us from tackling that person. Good? Good. So, here's our setup. Here's what happens. At the snap of the ball, everybody's going to try to go get her. She gets the ball, everyone tries to go get her. Whee! And in doing so, this running lane shows up. This is our problem to solve. As a defensive lineman, this is what the issue is. You can run straight down here and get a whole bunch of extra yards, and that's a problem. So how do we address that problem? With silos, what happens is, I don't care. I just keep doing my job running up the edge. And she keeps doing her job pushing around right here, and the running lane works, right? With poor specialization, not all specialization is done right. With poor specialization, you overcompensate. You try to do other people's jobs before your job is done. So if instead of ignoring it, I hop in here, instead she can just bounce outside. And now she scored a touchdown because there's nobody out there, okay? Is that pretty clear to everybody? Great. But this is how you do it right. Instead of jumping into this lane, I wait until my job is done, and then I pursue the problem. And that forces her back inside, the defensive tackle makes the tackle, and the quarterback is sacked before she gets to the line of scrimmage. That's how you do specialization well. And here's the bottom line. Do your job until one of two things. And this is a really important point in football. Do your job until the job is done or the job changes. The job can change. It changes a lot. We have to be flexible. The key to knowing when the job is done or the job changes is education and communication. You can't be afraid to call for help. If the person around you is struggling, if they're drowning, they have to let you know. You still have to get your job done, but now you're aware. You have the information necessary to help them as best you can once your job is complete. Or if your manager tells you that your job has changed, but that communication has to be in place. And everybody has to be familiar with what their job is, what their responsibilities are. So exercises that kind of help drive this point home. First, Roles within the organization. In football, we are constantly doing internal competitions. We have something that's called the Oklahoma drill. We have a few drills where pretty much you just get big people like me and you just have us push each other around until somebody loses. Over and over and over and over. So that can help you. You get people who do the same job and have them do that job at each other. You also build small teams that involve each one of those roles and have those small teams compete against each other. Your offense competing against your defense competing against your defense, with a separate group of defined roles. So what this gives you is three things. One, everybody starts to understand specifically how each role depends on each other's role. Two, you start to learn when and where to ask for help. And three, you build bonds across roles, not just within them, and that's a big problem with siloization. One of the biggest problems we have is that I think in our industry, some people value some roles over others. What you do, you might feel is more important than what another person does. Developers might see operations teams in particular lights. Doing these exercises where you're actually doing some friendly competition allows you to start depending on each other and respecting each other's roles. Let's get to the next piece. We've got mission focus. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Very often misattributed to Vince Lombardi. In fact, my interview tag has this quote with a picture of Vince Lombardi on it. If winning isn't everything, it is the only thing. This is a man who knew what his mission was. So the mission is very important. It provides a purpose for all levels and roles within the organization. It helps ensure that iterative goals are defined in support of that overall mission. And then it acts as a North Star. If people are working independently and you haven't clearly defined all the iterative goals along the way, it kind of gives them that North Star to be working towards, even when they don't have a specifically defined goal in front of them. If I'm playing on the field and I encounter a situation where I don't know what to do, I still know that I need to make sure I make this tackle before she gets into the end zone. That's my mission. Without it, individuals are actually incentivized to only meet personal and iterative goals. They don't have anything above that to be working for, so that's what they're incentivized to do. Silos build, which we already talked about that, and then morale can diminish because individuals don't feel like their work is important. You start to feel like the work you're doing, if it's not towards an overall goal, is busy work. And that's when morale starts to drop. The focus part is very important. You can define a mission, but if you can't get people to focus on it, there's no point. You need three things that people have to believe to be able to focus on your mission. They have to believe the mission is good. They have to actually believe in the mission itself. They have to believe the mission is possible. You don't just want to bang your head against the wall over and over. You'll give up very quickly. And three, they can impact the success of the mission. They have to believe that it has something to do with them and that they can affect that mission. Otherwise, what they're going to do is prioritize their goals or team goals, which do meet those criteria, ahead of the mission. And that's not what you want. That's how you end up with showboating wide receivers who got great stats, but their team never even makes the playoffs season after season after season. So define your missions and goals. You need to define who is affected. You need to define essentially the scope, the frame of reference. Is it for a time frame? Is it for the overall project? Is it for the task at hand? And then for each of those things, you need to define what success means. You need to know for an individual, for this task, this is what success is. For the team, for the overall project, this is what success is. You need all three of those things to have a clearly defined goal or mission. So I'm going to tell you a really quick story. I had a coach, it was his, I think, second season. It was my first season with him. And he had us come over. It was in the off season. And he lined up a row of cups of water. And he's supposed to come over, pick up the water, take a sip, put the cup back down. And he goes, "There, see? You believe in me. That could have been poison in that water." We were like, "Why would you poison us?" And I just did what you told me. You're my coach, right? You just do what you're told. And then that same coach, throughout the course of the season, he had it in his head that the defensive line position wasn't actually really that important. So he would promote you, in his own terms, to linebacker. And if you didn't do well, he would demote you to the defensive line. So our defensive line was awful. We never got anything accomplished. And the whole rest of the defense is actually predicated on the defensive line. What you establish here affects how well everybody else is able to do their job. Ultimately, about 2 years ago, we got a coach who used to be, actually Coach LB, the guy in the picture, used to be a defensive lineman in the NFL, and the first thing he said to us was, "You are the most important position on the football field." And I truly believe that every single position coach should be telling their players that. Because their players need to believe that without what you're doing, everything else will collapse. It doesn't mean that what everybody else is doing isn't just important. Every position coach should be telling their players that. And then everybody working together so that you can see how you fit in. The point being, bottom line, leadership is important, but only lemmings march off the cliff. If you don't respect that your top performing employees actually need to believe in a mission, they're gonna stop following you. The mission must be relevant to each team member. The leadership must demonstrate to each team member that his or her role is critical to the success of the mission, or you just give up. If there's no point to me being here, why am I even gonna work hard today? And then communication and inclusion. These people are smart people who are going to be making decisions on their own. You need to give them the respect and the information to be able to make those decisions in accordance with the mission as you would want them to make it. So the exercise, real quick, Team USA, my wife over here was on Team USA, she won a world championship as a center, Team USA. They had a unique challenge because it was the first Team USA, the first women's Team USA world championship. They had never seen anybody get that medal before. So what their coach did every single day was have them lay down and visualize what it felt like to have the gold medal be put around their neck and stand on that podium. They didn't lose a single game. In fact, no one scored on them the entire time. But what you can do, and I know it's one of those weird touchy-feely things, but we know that with software delivery, success is this kind of strange ethereal thing. It never ends, right? So you need to actually give people something to focus on to define what success means. Have them close their eyes and try to visualize what it feels like to do their job successfully. What that gives you is a way to actually focus on a thing. It's making it as tangible as possible. So overall, in closing, don't be afraid to encourage friendly and appropriate competition within the organization. It actually truly helps. It really, really does. Just make sure it's well-defined and friendly. Promote education, awareness, and ownership in order to achieve effective specialization. Okay? This is, in my mind, one of the most important. Provide your team members with relevant, attainable goals and make them real. That's where the visualization comes in. That's as close as you're going to get to making a goal a tangible thing. And then work to ensure all team members recognize the value in their roles and others' roles as well. And that's my presentation. Thanks everybody for listening.